量。跨越星辰大海，总有一种信仰指引前行航向。当1912年，孙中山将大清银行改组为中国银行，那一刻，以中国之银供中国之用的梦想便陡然而生，为社会谋福利，为国家求富强，成为振兴民族金融业的使命担当。那一刻，中国银行不畏强欲，坚守信诺，以宁可行路极深，不肯苟且从命的勇气，只愿为国家维持一分元气，为人民留一线生机。那一刻，中国银行跨越山海，上下求索，只为探寻一条建设近代化、国际化大银行之路。在世界金融业的舞台上，从此有了中国人挺立的脊梁。那一刻，中国银行以人人当具为国牺牲之精神，以先国后行、勤勉努力的信念，穿越纷飞的战火，迎接胜利的曙光。
人民生活国，今天胜利了！
当五星红旗飘扬神州大地，打破条框，迎难而上，积极投身社会主义建设的伟大事业。筹集外汇，支持中国远洋运输和外贸经济全面发展。在动荡中前行，在迷茫中寻找方向，冲破封锁和孤立，搭建起新中国与世界互联互通的桥梁。
解放思想，实事求是，团结一致，向前进。
当改革开放和现代化建设的号角吹响，敢想敢为，善作善成，让金融活水浸润民生的每一个角落。从第一张银行卡到第一台 ATM 机，从首家入选世界500强的中国企业，到发行港币和澳门币，为港澳金融稳定贡献新的力量。从国内首家 A+H 上市银行，到中国唯一的双澳银行，从成为首家入选全球系统重要性银行的新兴经济体金融机构，到成为中国唯一持续经营超过100年的银行，在民族金融史上书写下诸多第一与唯一。在前行的道路上，不断续写新的华章。新的时代，新的征程，秉承融通世界、造福社会的使命，赓续奋斗，勇毅前行。以国内商业银行为主体，全球化、综合化为两翼，奋力建设全球一流现代银行集团，在民族复兴的道路上描绘着新的壮美画卷。今天的中国银行全球化版图不断扩展，境外机构遍布全球60多个国家和地区， 形成了覆盖40多个国家的一带一路金融大动脉。今天的中国银行综合化平台日臻完善，投资银行直接投资、证券、保险、基金、飞机租赁、资产管理、金融科技、金融租赁，为客户提供更加多元完善的金融服务，发挥国内国际2个市场优势，支持国内大循环建设，畅通国内国际双循环，服务高水平对外开放，是中国银行辉煌历程奏响的时代乐章。支持实体经济发展，满足人民对美好生活的向往，为推动构建人类命运共同体贡献金融力量，是中国银行筑梦征途上镌刻的铮铮誓言。浩渺行无极，扬帆揽信风。110年，中国银行恰是风华正茂。110年，中国银行依旧激情飞扬。110年，征途漫漫，心怀理想。110年，尽管向前，一路阳光。
我在中国银行工作了整整36年。
我在中国银行工作了35年。
我的行龄已经53年了。
1940年到今年是71年。
1963年，那时候的中国银行啊，在东郊民巷34号。
1953年，
那个时候大概24岁吧。
我这大半辈子都是跟中国银行有缘。
我78年进行以后呢，前7、8年一直是在柜台工作的。我是非常喜欢这个业务。我印象当中有一个财务官学了几句中文吧，什么哥们儿你好，就每个柜台他都要打招呼。
中国银行把我们培养以行为家。我父亲是民国3年进中国银行当练习生。
你爷1958年从上海中行过来，参加了咱们这个银川分行的筹建。爷爷我、你、咱们中行3代人。
改革开放以后，好多生意人用大麻袋装着人民币做生意，所以说信用卡是各个行业，尤其是生意人员，甚至是说这个青年都非常期待的。
我们是一个大国，千万不要自卑，千万不要自卑。
香港是我们祖国的土地，要让英国来管制，这样的处境什么时候能完呢？
那个时候香港也不是香港现在金融黄山，1分钱都还是有用。
回顾我这一生啊，最重要一个经历，就是能够参加到香港的回归工作的全过程。我从20多岁参加工作，也是苦苦等了几十年了，难以形容的心情。
10年之前，中国银行已经进入到全球10大顶级的这个银行之列，对此呢，我感到非常骄傲。
我作为一名小语种的毕业生，能够用自己的专业 架起中航连接世界的桥梁。
我骄傲，
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 我骄傲，我是中航人。
祝中国银行的事业蒸蒸日上，
银行这边旗帜越来越闪亮，
能够实现全球服务的梦想。
祝贺，祝贺，再祝贺！
我感谢中国银行，
祝中国银行110周年生日快乐！
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond Expo. For this session, we're going to be discussing the state of the global venture capital industry and asking the question, is the drought season here? We're very privileged to have two amazing speakers with us, Tom Tsao, founding partner of Gobi Partners, and Connie Chan, general partner of Andreessen Horowitz. Now, some are calling it the Great VC Shakedown, or shake out. Others are calling it the big freeze. Whatever terms you may use, no one can deny that this rising inflationary environment, the turbulence in the capital markets, the global supply chain challenges, the recurring COVID surges, and the Ukraine war are all having a significant impact on the venture capital's confidence in deploying investments across the world. Today's panel brings together two of the industry's most prominent investors from the US and from Asia, providing us with a comprehensive perspective on how VC sentiment is evolving. From the heart of Silicon Valley to the tech parks of Shenzhen, all the way to the Twin Towers of Kuala Lumpur, we will take a pulse on how investors are assessing the impact of this highly volatile global market environment, how these changes present both new challenges and opportunities, and how emerging technology trends are shaping the market landscape. So Thomas Tsao is a venture capital investor and co-founder of Pan-Asian venture capital firm Gobi Partners. He has over 30 years of experience in venture capital, operations, fund management, and investment banking. Over the last 20 years, Tom has actively helped entrepreneurs build companies and create value. Tom co-founded Gobi Partners in 2002 and has been named Forbes' list of top VCs for a number of years. Tom also led the team that manages the Alibaba Hong Kong Entrepreneurs Fund and has invested in a number of companies through that fund, such as AutoX, GoGoX, Prenetics, WeLab, and many more. In 2015, Tom relocated to Kuala Lumpur, where he set up several funds with Mavcap, Malaysia's largest VC firm. Through this move, Tom has had a direct hand in shaping Southeast Asia's vibrant startup scene by investing in now well-known names such as Carsome, Delivery, EasyParcel, and many more. In 2016, Tom launched the firm's Taqwa vertical, which focuses on Islamic ventures in the global Muslim economy. Notable names under this vertical are Umrami, Ryder, Truckiton, and Collabs. So very honored to have you today, Tom. Next, we have Connie Chan, a good friend and general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, where she focuses in on consumer technology. Connie's made a name for herself during her multi-decade career, blazing trails for women in the venture capital space by discovering game-changing consumer tech companies in Silicon Valley, and has been crowned the China Whisperer of Silicon Valley with her ability to spot game-changing Asian and Chinese technologies that can transfer back to the US. Connie joined the firm in 2011 as a deal partner on the investment team before becoming a general partner in 2018. She serves on the boards of Cider, Whatnot, and Kobold. Before joining Andreessen Horowitz, Connie worked at HP, leading its WebOS efforts in China. She started her career as a private equity investor in Elevation Partners, investing in media and entertainment, and has a number of accolades as a venture capitalist, including Fast Company's most creative people, Wired's next 20 tech visionaries. She's been on the Midas Brink list and is a young global leader at the World Economic Forum. Connie, thanks so much for joining us today, and it's great to see you. So with that, some very impressive backgrounds with our speakers. We're going to jump into a number of questions and really try and delve into what's the state of venture capital today. We're going to start with Connie. Connie, you're a veteran investor in Silicon Valley and even born and raised and educated in the heart of the Bay Area. You've seen a number of market cycles in your career and the trends in the industry from Web 1.0 all the way to Web 3.0, something which Andreessen is also very much focused on. As a general partner at one of the most preeminent firms in the Valley, tell us what you're seeing on the ground in light of the macro factors I previously mentioned. Also, there's a lot of chatter about the incidence of layoffs at startups, headcount freezes at the big tech companies, and fear of down rounds for firms looking to raise money. How bad is it really, and where do you see the market headed as we enter 2023? Okay, I think you're on mute, Connie.
Apologies. Great question, Brian. Obviously the macro changes have been widely covered. In the last several months, we've seen many companies across pretty much every industry have to take a relook at their priorities, their areas of investment, and a lot of teams, not just the small startups, but large companies too, are evaluating their runways and trying to figure out how can they make the cash that they have in the bank last longer so that they have more time to reach their milestones so they can fundraise in a more favorable environment down the line. For many of the companies in our portfolio, this often means that they are spending more time focusing on their go-to-market strategies. They are re-looking at, they're taking a closer look at their tech. How are they acquiring customers? How are they retaining customers? Making sure those LTV CAC ratios work. Basically going back to basic unit economics, which is actually a very healthy thing for the environment. In terms of what the large tech companies are doing, I can't speak to them specifically, but I would say in terms of large companies, if you've seen the things that they've announced over the last couple of months, you've seen large consumer companies kind of pull back from a lot of the experimental things that they were doing. So Instagram announcing that they're going to deprioritize commerce, as an example, or Snap, during their layoff, they deprioritized the number of things, including their accelerator, games, their original content effort. But from where I sit, that actually creates new areas of opportunities for startups. One, a lot of talent that comes out of these companies, they're very well trained, they're very capable, and a lot of them are now thinking of what they want to do next, whether it's join a company or potentially start a new company. So there's a lot of talent that can now join the startups we've already funded, and there's a lot of potential new founders that we can fund down the line. But overall, I'd say we're still making a lot of investments. On the consumer side, our deal flow is potentially, I'd say, probably a little slower than last year. But we're still looking at lots of companies, and there's still lots of areas we're actively investing in. I'm particularly excited about new, I'd say, kind of private, smaller, curated communities as a potential area of investment. I look at Facebook groups and how it's still thriving and flourishing, and one of the main features that people use when they use the Facebook app. And I wonder, are there new startups that can tackle or take the best learnings from groups and create large businesses out of that? I'm always excited about companies that are using video first or an AI first way of rethinking how to solve a problem. I'm also very excited about, like you mentioned, Brian, cross-border trends or things that already had mainstream adoption in China, and figuring out how we can port that over to the US. In the US, for example, I think we're still in the earliest days of live shopping. Video shopping is still yet to be a very big mainstream trend, but to me, it's inevitable that kind of thing will happen and be a big trend next year.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Connie, for sharing that. So it sounds like despite these macro trends and some challenges that people have identified, that presents new opportunities, and you're very much sort of looking closely at how those are emerging. And it doesn't sound like the VC industry by any means is slowing down. It's more about kind of how you adapt to these changes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my team's hiring. A lot of teams are still hiring, but we're still growing.
Fantastic. Good. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to move to Tom now. Tom, as founding partner of Gobi Ventures, you're one of the longest running Asian VC firms with formative roots beginning in Shanghai, but you're also one of the earliest VCs to set up in Southeast Asia, operating in many of the countries in the region from Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, all the way to Pakistan and beyond. Asia has not been immune to some of these challenges we talked about that are hitting Silicon Valley. Publicly listed firms, even like SEA and others, have lost more than half their market value in the public markets because of this downturn. And also, a number of companies have announced layoffs. At the same time, when I visited Singapore just last month, I was amazed by how much activity was going on there. Even Chinese tech executives and fund managers looking to either open new international offices in the region and even setting up new funds. Is it really the VC winter, or are we witnessing more of a reset? Tell us what you're seeing from the region.
Yeah, hey, Brian, it's great to be here with you and Connie. Great to see everyone. And again, thanks to TechNode and Lu Gang for inviting me. Brian, I think that, again, great question. I think, folks like Connie and I can appreciate that. I know it's bad out there. Sentiment is not good. But according to my count, this is like the 5th time the VC industry was supposed to collapse, right? At least what I can remember, was, what was it? The Asian financial crisis in 97, right? The dot-com bubble. I lived through SARS in Shanghai. Then we had the great financial recession, right? Crisis, 08, 09. And then we just went through COVID. Each time, there was talk that, oh my goodness, the sky is falling. And I think each time the VC industry came out, showed and demonstrated its resilience. And although it's really bad, I mean, we are seeing a perfect storm of really a big trends all coming together. And it's going to be, painful for everybody in the short term, but long term, I think we'd all agree here. I mean, if you're in the venture industry, you're always a get glasses kind of half full type of individual, and I think this time it will also power through. It's because of the entrepreneurs, right? What they bring to the table, the problem solving that they continue to demonstrate. That's what's going to get us all through. And the problems are bigger. They're global in nature. And so I do think, I don't know if it's a reset as much as a shift. I think what's been going on, and I know we're going to touch upon this later, what's been going on kind of from a macro standpoint is really allowing the entire venture capital mindset to shift and distribute to other parts of the world, right? Because if you think about it, I mean, VC and this tremendous innovation culture has largely been kind of concentrated in China and the US have been taking up so much of the spotlight. And I think with what's been going on, it's allowed some of that spotlight to shift to other regions and bring in more entrepreneurs into this global ecosystem. And we're certainly seeing that. And Brian, you touched upon that for Southeast Asia. I think just coming up right now, Singapore is going to be a hive of activity in the next 2 weeks. I think there's 6 conferences going on, bookended by, they're starting off with Super Return now, bookended by the F1. There's going to be thousands of people. I think Singapore is in danger of sinking into the ocean. So many people are showing up. So I think that, that's still going on. And I think, the industry is going to find a way, right? There's other things, right? It's bringing attention to other markets like Pakistan, right? So I think people are looking further away from the 2 traditional mainstream ecosystems, and that's kind of what we're seeing.
Exciting. I think those are very astute observations, Tom, and I think there's so much going on now in these frontier markets that you talked about, markets that we haven't considered traditionally, but at the same time, both Silicon Valley, US, and China, the tech sector, all have inspired and influenced but they're also developing in their own ways. So thank you for highlighting that. I'm going to pose a question now to both of you to talk about, how your respective funds, investment strategies, and sector focus have evolved. Again, given these macro trends, things like the pandemic and the climate change that we're experiencing, there's been an increased focus on concepts like ESGs. And I wonder if you guys are moving away from just the pure consumer tech, sort of profile, and looking at areas that have more focus on things like healthcare, clean, green tech, sustainability elements. I mean, I imagine these are things that have been on your radar in the past, but they're becoming even more important and critical. And how real is all this? In light of some of the critics calling out greenwashing, there's been a lot of criticism of ESGs as well. So what are you guys thinking in terms of your portfolio kind of focus, but also, what are the demands that you're hearing from your LPs and that they're placing on you guys as fund managers in light of these trends? We'll go back to Connie first. Yeah.
Sure. I love this category. One of the 3 boards that I sit on is Cobalt Metals, and it's a software company that uses AI and machine learning to map out the Earth's crust for mineral mapping. And they basically have a way of using algorithms to all critical metals that are required for electric vehicle batteries. And if you look at the demand for EVs, if you just even want to convert all passenger vehicles from gas to EVs, we are short globally over $10 trillion worth of those 5 categories of metals alone. And that's a deal that I did pre-COVID. So it's not like a recent all the supply chain issues around EVs or the need to electrify the world is now much more of a mainstream topic. And so there's a lot more attention being put on the space, a lot more capital is realizing the demand for EVs has very much been pulled forward, not just through regulation, but just pure consumer demand. When consumers are buying new cars now, they are looking for EV opportunities. So I look at it not just because of I guess, pressures or input from LPs, but just because I think it's a fantastic business opportunity if you find the right team and the right business model. For me in particular, when I'm looking at things kind of in the climate space, so I'm still focused on software-driven companies. I don't have the expertise to evaluate a lot of the hardware solutions, but I still think there's fantastic opportunities that use software to address these large problems in climate.
Sorry, I'm back. You can... Oh my God, it was like frozen, and I'm like, oh shoot. You were talking, Connie, about pressures from LPs. Should we? Do you mind if we kind of restart that question? Maybe
yeah.
You're comfortable.
I'll do that one again. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. So, do you want me to repeat the question, or are you okay? You know what I said.
I know what you said.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Just start from top, right, on this question?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, okay. No problem. Right. So Brian, one of the board seats that I sit on that you mentioned earlier is Cobalt Metals. And this is a company I'm very proud of. What they do is they use AI and machine learning to do mineral mapping of the Earth's crust and below. So using software to better guess where to dig for copper, lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth metals. And I classify this kind of company in some ways like a climate tech company, because you are basically searching for more necessary metals that are required in EV batteries, a very necessary component. I mean, globally, if we just want to convert passenger vehicles from gas to electric, we are short over $10 trillion worth of these metals alone. So the reason, though, why I'm excited about it is not necessarily because of LP pressure, but because I think it's just truly a great financial opportunity. There's very clear consumer demand in climate. Some of it is regulatory, some of it is purely consumer. In the US, a lot of that EV demand is coming just from consumer preference. People are looking not just at Teslas, but they're pushing a bunch of other car manufacturer brands to start pulling their EV roadmaps forward, because that's what consumers are looking for. So I've been spending more time in climate. It's not just because of regulation or LP pressure or anything like that, but just purely because I think it's a great financial opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Connie, for sharing that. Fascinating company that you're on the board of. Tom, how do you see these trends kind of impacting, your portfolio and your areas of focus?
Well, I think just what Connie was saying, I absolutely agree with. I think a lot of it is not only because of LP pressure, but there's opportunities like what Connie was talking about, EVs. Absolutely, consumer demand is increasing, and it's not only on the production, the batteries, but actually, how consumers are going to buy EVs. And so companies, we have a
charge them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So battery swapping is an area we're looking at, but even on just how do you buy an EV? We have a company called Carsome, and I think the new EV manufacturers may move away or are already moving away from the traditional dealership model. I mean, we use e-commerce on everything. Why can't we buy cars online? And so I think that's going to make how people purchase EVs easier. You're seeing a lot of interest from the Chinese EV manufacturers. They don't necessarily want to set up dealerships in Southeast Asia, for example. They want to go direct. Everybody in China is so familiar with buying things online. That mentality, I think, is seeping through. And I think one day you're going to be able to buy an EV online and get it delivered to you just like you would like on Taobao or Tmall. And so that day is coming. So you're seeing that. And if it's easier to buy EVs, fantastic. Problem solved one. But then how do you charge? Right, Connie? So you mentioned that already. So we have to build out that infrastructure. Is it going to be charging stations or battery swapping or some new type of model? All exciting areas to look at. So I think that's
all the prop tech related to that, right? It's like a lot of apartments or high rises. Those garages are not outfitted with chargers, or even on the buildings and the commercial buildings, they need to start managing their carbon footprints, right? So there's a lot of opportunity in climate.
I totally agree. And then the second thing is, I think everybody here, what Gobi's doing with Andreessen is there's also a growing realization after, COVID, is that, look, venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, we have to solve these problems. And if we don't do it, there's nobody else that's going to do it. The world is increasingly interconnected. We don't live in little pockets of prosperity. When one part of the world suffers, we all suffer, right? And that's what I think the next decades, right? Whether it's COVID knows no borders, right? Climate change, there's no borders, and that's why it's an increasingly interconnected. I know parts of the world want to go back to, more, what is it? You know what I'm saying? Like nationalistic tendencies, or go back to silos. But the reality is, we're all interconnected. Pollution is a cross-border problem, right? Healthcare is a cross-border problem. And so, it's going to take a new mindset.
Yeah. And the capitalist way of interpreting what Tom just said is there's a lot of great talent now going into these industries. We have a whole separate bio and health fund that's chasing all these opportunities. And some of those founders are not coming from those sectors. They are people who during COVID or before COVID decided they wanted to dedicate their lives for a new mission.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So in a way, this new environment is creating new challenges, new problems, but that's exactly what fuels venture capital innovation, is solving problems. And in a way, you've got even more now to tackle, and all the better that you have the funds to allocate to solving these problems. That's great. Thank you, guys. Interesting answers to this. Let's go to another issue that's affecting all of us that seems to have no borders, which is this U.S.-China tension. It's ratcheting up every day. There is also, decoupling in the making. A multitude of industries and investment areas now already seem to be affected by this new sentiment. So share with us how this geopolitical tension is affecting the markets you're active in. Obviously, Connie, you're someone who has an eye on both U.S. and China innovation, and you've been someone who's been able to bridge that and kind of show the benefits for each in terms of collaboration and learning. So how has it affected and impacted your own investment strategies in the companies you invest in? And is there a silver lining to all this? So we'll go back to you, Connie.
I mean, there's definitely some silver linings, but I agree with you that the tensions are not looking like they're on a great trajectory. I mean, the most obvious near-term impacts, there are supply chain issues for companies that have physical merchandise that needs to be moved cross-border. But there are also industries that are not as favorable in the eyes of venture capitalists. And this is especially true for a lot of consumer companies in China. However, I do think the silver lining is that talent is still talent, and there's still great founders everywhere. I meet founders in the US, in China, all over the world now, and many of them, rather than building just for their respective countries, they are building for a global audience. Today, if I looked at the App Store in the US, the top 2 apps are widget apps. I think they're Chinese developers. And the second one, there are 4 Chinese characters in the name of the app. It is so blatantly a Chinese developer, Chinese app. And number 2 in the US App Store today. So I just think this idea that the top apps can come from everywhere and every country is still going to be true, no matter how these kind of US-China tensions persist. Talent, thanks to TikTok, now realizes if you're a founder in China, you can build for the entire world. You can still go outside of, you can dominate China, but you can also grow and expand outside of that region. So I think talent right now still is more global minded than they were, say, 5 years ago. And that's a really great silver lining.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, if people can frame the issues and the challenges more on a global basis, maybe that will help overcome some of this attitudinal barriers, such that, again, as we were talking about VC, if our common goal is to solve these problems, hopefully that mitigates some of this tension, but understanding that politics always plays a role in how people interact. Okay, great. Tom, how about you? You're someone who's in a region that is really kind of a confluence of different cultures and political sort of systems. So and right next to China, but also a lot of influence from the United States.
Well, I think I think Connie spoke so eloquently already on one of the silver linings. I'll shift to another. Again, I think what we're seeing is one of the beneficiaries or silver linings that we're seeing is Southeast Asia is getting a lot of attention just because it is a very culturally and diverse region that has connections to both kind of China, India, and the US. And I think, again, there's just, like you were saying, Brian, it's a mixture, right? And so because Southeast Asia can draw upon so many of these influences, and again, it's still relatively open, right? So right now, kind of, Chinese capital, Chinese entrepreneurs, not necessarily welcome in the US and vice versa. Where are they all welcome? Southeast Asia, right? Great English. People can speak Chinese, Cantonese, great Indian influence. There's Bahasa, there's different religions, Buddhism, Islam. It's a fantastic melting pot in a certain way, and it's completely open. So what we're seeing now are entrepreneurs where, again, because of the political tension, maybe the governments can't directly bridge, but, people to people, they still want what's convenient, right? So we have a company called SleekFlow that's building a platform across WeChat, WhatsApp, Line, right? Wouldn't you like something? Because you don't really care. You just want one kind of a dashboard where you can communicate with any of your friends without being constrained to, if I'm in China, I can only use WeChat. And so I think you're seeing these interesting solutions come because, people want to talk to each other and they want to do what's convenient. So I give that as an easy example. And there's so many more, right? So governments are trying to kind of, do the typical kind of, hey, I want to control. And I understand that, but people are global by nature. They want to connect with anybody who's their friend, and they may not have the same considerations. And again, I think that's going to create opportunities for entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Fascinating. So while the world is, and the governments are trying to decouple, you have businesses and venture companies that are trying to recouple the communities. That's a fascinating phenomenon, yet definitely a need. I think most people would appreciate the fact they don't have to open up multiple apps just to talk to their friends in different countries. Well, Tom, you mentioned we talked about China, and Gobi started in Shanghai probably over 20 years ago. Obviously, you're now in Southeast Asia, but you still have funds operating in China.
We do, yes.
Obviously, it hasn't been an easy few years with changes in the regulatory environment and a lot of kind of, how should I say, attention around different sectors that, have been significantly affected by these policy changes. However, many have pointed out this really represents maturation in certain sectors and an intention to shift the flow of capital from to other high priority industries and sectors. One interesting region of growth seems to be the Greater Bay Area. The areas around southern China, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Macau, Hong Kong. Tell us how Gobi's navigating these changes in the Chinese tech markets and a bit more about the prospects of what they call the Greater Bay Area.
Yeah, no, I know there's been a lot of kind of headlines out there. So maybe just to share with the audience what we're thinking. I think if you look, and I've been very lucky, I think, to be a witness to kind of China's evolution. I think we're now in phase 3. What I mean by that is phase 1, the government was very focused on building out Beijing and Zhongguancun, right, as kind of that tech hub. That went on for a certain amount of time. And then when Gobi set up in 2002, we were very fortunate because we caught that second wave. And I remember when we set up in 2002, we were one of the few VC funds operating out of Shanghai.
Yeah.
But then again, it's, I was very fortunate, and I did something that most people actually, should do, is just read the 5-year plan. And the 5-year plan said they were going to develop Shanghai as the center for the semiconductor industry. I ended up living, Brian, if you remember, in Zhangjiang, which was right next to SMIC. My children even went to SMIC's school, which at one point was one of their biggest revenue generators before the fabs got online. But I always laugh. The Chinese government kind of tells you the answers to the questions if you just kind of read the 5-year plan. And if you now look at the next 5-year plan, it's very clear. They're going to develop out the Greater Bay Area, which I think is one of the most exciting experiments going on in human history. China is trying to build out the world's first megalopolis. Megalopolis, look that word up. I didn't know what that word meant either, but it's when you take like a number of cities and put it together to make it into one huge super city, right? And so we're talking about an area now, 11 cities, the 9+2, right? And it's 70 million people, 70 to 80 million people as a standalone basis. Brian and Connie, you'll love this, right? Every time they say, hey, if California were its own country, it'd be the 5th largest in the world, right? If the Greater Bay Area were its own country, it would be the same size, the same GDP as South Korea, right? So we're talking about something very big. And what makes it different this time? Because in the past, Brian, they talked about the Pearl River Delta. I mean, this is not a new concept.
Yeah.
This time it's different. It's because the central government is really putting in the infrastructure, one, and the policies, right? So we're talking about tax equalization, right? So if you're getting taxed at Hong Kong rates and you go work in GBA, you'll be taxed at Hong Kong rates. You're talking about pension fund portability. They're really talking about kind of free movement of labor, which is, they didn't do that before, right? So they're putting in the policies. And imagine, we all know Hong Kong, fantastic place, but, housing prices a little high. What if you could extend out the entire Greater Bay Area and commute? I mean, Brian, when I grew up in New York, it was very normal. I lived on Long Island. We used to commute an hour and a half from the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan. Nobody cares. In Hong Kong, it's like, oh my God, somewhere you got to walk 10 minutes. It's too far. I think that concept's going to change. And I think that's what's going to happen in Greater Bay Area. I think it's very exciting. So yeah, China headlines may be a bit negative, but if you look at overall what's going on, you disengage with China at your own risk. There's so much innovation still coming out. Yeah. And within China, I think the most exciting opportunity right now is the Greater Bay Area. And so we increased the size of our office in Hong Kong. Like Connie, we're looking to hire. So if you're looking, please contact me. And so there still continues to be incredible opportunities.
I'm still waiting for like a high-speed rail in California. I'll have to wait longer.
Hey, same thing, Connie. We're waiting for that high-speed rail from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore. And if they could build that, wow, game changer.
Oh, game changer. I mean, Connie, how long have you been waiting for that high-speed rail?
Decades.
We would all love that. Wow, how do you pronounce that word, Tom?
Megalopolis. Megalopolis.
Super city.
Yeah.
Okay, well, fascinating assessment of this potential, particularly around the Greater Bay Area. And as we come to a close of this panel, and it's been really enlightening. I appreciate all that you guys have shared with your insights. I want to wrap up with a question about entrepreneurship. Around, I guess, given entrepreneurship is all about maintaining an optimistic yet realistic outlook, and you guys both strike me as people who really see the positive side of any of these challenges, which I think is necessary when you're an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist. I want to use the final opportunity to ask each of you, what words of advice or encouragement would you have to share with any new investors who are brave enough to set up a fund amidst this time? Because I actually know that there's a number of people raising funds right now because this downturn in the market does represent an opportunity of sorts if you're able to actually raise the funds. But what advice or encouragement would you have for them? And two, any entrepreneurs who might be trying to raise funds now amidst this environment, what kind of final words would you have for either of them? Connie?
Sure. Well, on the investor side, I agree with you. There's a lot of opportunity when you invest in a downturn because things are a lot cheaper. If I look at valuations of the seed companies or the Series A companies that we were looking at a year versus now, they're way down, probably by over half. So you can buy things at a much lower price. And remember, in venture capital, our time horizons are very long. We're not usually seeing exits, at least in the US, for say 8 to 10 years. It's faster in China, but in the US, people often will stay private for longer. And so what will the economy look like 8 to 10 years from now? Will it be better than now? I think there's a good chance the answer is yes. And so as long as you kind of take that long-term approach, if you invest now, your buy-in price is just much cheaper than if you would invest later. I actually think the harder part is if you were an investor that raised money last year and deployed all of it last year. Because they bought in at much higher prices.
Buyer's remorse.
Yeah, and now you're like hoping that those companies have enough cash to make it to their next round. You might be thinking about flat rounds. You might be thinking about down rounds. You have employee morale issues.
Yeah.
So the best situation is, like you said, if you raise the money but you haven't deployed yet, and you can take your pick of the litter right now, because investors are taking longer to make their investment decisions. They are doing more diligence. And so if you have high conviction in an area and you can act with speed and conviction, you can get into great deals. And then in terms of advice for founders, I would say there's a lot of new technologies, such as AI, or generative AI right now is just starting to go mainstream in the US, and people don't know what all the major use cases are going to be. So there's still a lot of new technologies, whether it's AI or VR or what have you, that have yet to transform most of our day-to-day lives. And so I would say if you find a way to leverage new tech to make something 10x better, those opportunities are still there.
Yeah, outstanding. In very, very optimistic way of looking at things, particularly for those investors trying to raise funds in today's market. Thank you for that. Tom, how about you? What kind of advice would you have?
Yeah, no, I would just to say basically what Connie's saying, but I turn it into a question, right? It's what's the old saying? When is the best time to invest into a unicorn? That's 10 years ago. So when is the second best time to invest into a unicorn? It's today, right? So, you got to take a long-term view, right? It's just, it's difficult. But again, I would again, I think as Connie was saying, we're all optimists here. I do think for the entrepreneurs out there, the mission is so critical. What you're doing is so critical, right? Look, when are we going to find the cure for cancer? Right? Can we ever develop packaging that after we throw it away, it becomes fertilizer? Can we make cars that the more you drive, the air gets cleaner? Can we make fast fashion where after you throw it out, where we use dyes that actually clean the water? And can we make prisons where actually they're also world-class educational facilities? I mean, these are questions, right, that I'm sure the entrepreneurs should be tackling, and they're really worthwhile. And I think your question earlier about ESG is that, as Connie was saying, these technologies and the mindset now, the scope of VC is expanding, I think. And the problems we're touching upon now are even more real. And so for all the entrepreneurs that are out there, hey, we've all been through it. Everybody, what's the old Plato saying? Be kind to everyone you meet. For everyone is having a difficult struggle. It's true. Every one of us, we're dealing. So it's tough for everybody. You're not alone. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Well said, Tom.
Very well said. And what I would add to that is, amidst a world where I think the problems and the challenges that we're facing become more and more existential, the one thing that gives me a glimmer of hope are people like yourselves and the entrepreneurs that you're backing, because you are, through your work, truly focusing on trying to come up with solutions for these problems. And we've got plenty of problems today that we have to tackle. So if that's an indication of opportunities for VC, I think you guys have a very bright future. So I want to thank you, Tom. Thank you, Connie, from opposite sides of the world. You guys are doing great work. Really encouraged by the sharing that you've offered us today. I think we will take to heart everything that you said, and hopefully the entrepreneurs and the investors have learned something from today's session. And again, appreciate your time.
exciting panel. Some very, very experienced and intelligent people I'm excited to bring to you today. We'll start with a good friend of mine and one of the most dynamic people I know, Rockaway Bernstein, next gen for the Bernstein Family Office, a venture partner with Regeneration, founder of RLB Ventures, the founder of the Spark Family Office Group, and also the chairperson for the Child Safety Pledge and the co-chair of Tell My Story. Rockaway, welcome. And then we also have Andrew Rubenstein, founder of Shorewind Capital. Andrew, maybe if you want to take a moment or two and just tell us who Shorewind Capital is.
Yeah, so Shorewind Capital is an early stage venture fund that was launched last year by myself and two partners. We're backed solely by Family Office Capital. We'll likely go out and raise outside capital in about a year or so, but for now we're basically a family investment vehicle, and we do seed-ish stage investments focused mostly on human health and on clean tech.
Fantastic, thank you. And lastly, we've got Michael Smith, CEO of Pond Valley Family Office and general partner of Regeneration VC. Michael, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, Pond Valley is a family office focused on a variety of environmental, climate tech related focuses. And Regeneration is an early stage venture fund that was that the family office helped seed, focused on the future of consumer industries, apparel, food, packaging through an environmental lens.
Fantastic. And Rockaway, I don't want you to be left out here. Maybe tell a little bit about you and your story.
Yeah, so second generation. My father was the founder of Alliance Bernstein, originally from New York City. I mostly focus on child protection, child sexual abuse prevention, and mental health in my sort of impact life. I run an incredible family office community with Mike Zhu and Hassan Dayak, who were part of connecting me to this. And then I'm also proud to work with Michael at Regeneration VC on circular economy and climate tech.
Great. So thank you all for being here. And let's just jump right in. So I think, when you talk about investments and, the tech space has certainly been the sexy space that, people over the past decade or so and even longer, everybody knows the big names, the big VCs. But family offices play a big space or a big part in that space, as well as healthcare, biotech, and then really any space that I think the three of you are involved in. And just be interested in some of your thoughts on where you think family offices are having a different impact in this space, sometimes not seen, but certainly very influential. And maybe Andrew, if you want to start us off as to how you feel, your family office in particular, but also in the industry, how family offices are impacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think family offices play a big role in the tech industry. A lot of them are investors themselves in those big VC funds. I think they do that for two reasons. One, just for their own sort of investment returns. The other would be so they can kind of invest directly in some of the companies that those venture funds will first invest in and sort of identify the winners. So they absolutely play a big role. You're right, they tend to be more behind the scenes. I think that's because they don't have to put in kind of as much effort into marketing. One, because they don't have to go invest, or they don't have to go raise outside capital. And then two, their value add is sort of inherent in their family name a lot of the time. So if you're a small venture fund, you sort of have to position yourself to entrepreneurs to say, we can add value by doing X, Y, and Z. If you're a family office with a big name behind you, you don't really have to make that pitch as much of the time. So they definitely play a big role, both in the sense that they invest in a lot of those companies directly, and they invest in the venture funds that sort of source them.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about just the inherent value in the name, but also sort of the adding value that maybe funds and VCs don't. I don't know, Michael, if you have any thoughts as to how sort of a family office within an ecosystem. And I know with your family office in particular, the way you guys have specific expertise in different sectors are able to add value to investments as opposed to just, being big check writers.
Yeah, it's a great point, and Andrew hit some really interesting components of why family offices can be unique and add value within the ecosystem. That industry expertise allows so much potential for connectivity, for partnerships, for really accelerating an underlying investment opportunity. We're seeing, within the climate tech space, a number of family offices step in to more rapidly accelerate innovation and time to market. You look at Seed to Growth in Chicago with Lucas Walton and what they've done for food, or Horizons in Hong Kong, similarly in packaging and apparel and food. And it's amazing to see what that impact can be. It's a signal potentially for other venture funds to invest alongside, even within lead capacities. So we're seeing a lot of that. And this goes back decades. And, early in my career, when I was pretty young, I got to work with Shamrock, the Disney family office. We purchased a TV station from them in the 80s and really got to see at an early age the potential of using connectivity within different market sets to create opportunity and really accelerate innovation.
Yeah, Michael, I appreciate it. And Rockaway, I know, certainly you've had an experience investing across, I think, a lot of spectrums, but if you've seen other people and partners invest with you, any thoughts as to where expertise either has been added or value has been added, or maybe unique ways that family offices can do things that other VCs can't? You've had experience sort of on both sides of that.
Yeah, I think what I see a lot of is families want to co-invest with other families. And there's a real interest in, co-invest and building those relationships over time. And there's also a lot of trust in relationships. And so to me, what I see is there's a certain flywheel and there's a certain, I would say, multiplier effect when you bring family offices in as investors. And also there's usually connectivity globally. So, to Michael's point about the office in Hong Kong, and then thinking about the Shamrock office, often these families are interconnected. And so bringing them in brings a network and sort of a lot of these names that are trusted behind them.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point about family offices co-investing together. And, given the climate we're in today, where I think some of that velocity of investment has slowed, maybe, over the past, again, decade, 12, 15, 20 years, where I think, people were pretty active. This past year or so, people have slowed that down. Are you finding, again, all three of you, family offices trying to find family offices more aggressively that can sort of co-invest and partner with them? And are you seeing that where family offices are sticking with sort of the groups they know in the geographies they know, or is that sort of global climate expanding and now you have family offices from Asia co-investing in the US and the US co-investing, East Coast from West Coast and things like that? But how do you see sort of that market and that environment changing over the past, say, year or so? And what are you seeing out there as you're out?
Yeah, I can speak to this. I can speak to this a little bit. My sense is that family offices are a little bit more sort of risk off right now, and I think part of that is because they don't know exactly how to value their current portfolio, because probably a lot, if they were investing in sort of venture growth stages, a lot of those companies probably are a little bit overvalued, and because they're private companies, they don't really have to get remarked until they go and raise subsequent funds. So I think a lot of family offices are fairly content to sit on the sidelines right now and say, let's just see how the dust settles and kind of evaluate exactly how much our portfolio is right now. For us, we are kind of, we're a family investment vehicle, but we're also sort of just a new venture fund on the block. So, we launched 14 months ago. We're excited that valuations are coming down. We're also excited that other venture investors are staying on the sidelines a bit more, because it means we get more access to deals we otherwise wouldn't. So it's been interesting to see this sort of bifurcation where some venture investors are like going full on, like this is a great time to invest. Then other ones are like, oh, let's just wait and see.
Yeah, just echoing that, I'm seeing very similar reactions market-wide. And when you look at all the different places that family offices invest, it's a big question. But from our day-to-day within climate tech, it's actually become a very good time with this recent climate bill, with a lot of momentum on corporate and regulatory tailwinds. And so we're seeing a flood of interest coming in and people wanting to learn more and how do they get smart and how do they figure out who are the right, managers and the right opportunities to focus on and where things are really headed. So there are a few bright spots, but overall there's just a whole heck of a lot of uncertainty. And most FOs have that ability to be long view, right? And so to Andrew's point, why rush in right now, figure out where things are. I remember a few months back before things were getting really choppy, it was like, oh, I'm so over-indexed in venture because I'm having all these good, outcomes. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get a better balance to my portfolio construction and things like that. And so this is changing day by day, but right now it's been exciting to see all the interest within what we're doing within the family office community.
Yeah, and I think to echo that, there's, the risk aversion piece I'm definitely seeing, but the interest in co-invest is very strong. And so what I do hear a lot behind closed doors is a desire for people to see each other's deal flow within families, and to sort of share what they're looking at because there is more trust. The other thing I've seen in the last, I would say 2 years since COVID, is more of an interest in mental health and in healthcare. Education, those are spaces that have really shifted. There's more of a desire to look at ed tech and sort of alternative sources of education and more equity around education. And from a sort of public health perspective, a lot has changed. And so I'm seeing more and more offices that are trying to leverage their networks and their resources to solve some really big global problems because everyone was affected. I have a family office friend who came out of Shanghai and was incredibly traumatized by the lockdown and was sharing with me that it had such an effect on his mental health and is now really interested in some of these spaces he had never looked at before. And so I think it left an indelible impact on all of us and how we think about how we leverage capital for social good.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to transition a little bit as we talk about capital leading to social good. And I know both Michael, Andrew, and as well you, Rafaela, talked about sort of public health issues and climate change, and it's a good time I think to address impact investing, which anytime you go to one of these conferences or anytime you spend enough time talking to family and offices, you hear that term impact investing. It's become a real sort of hot topic, but also one that I think can be controversial in terms of how you define impact and certainly how you measure impact. I think if you talk to 10 people, you might get 10 different answers as to what impact investing really means, but we'd love to sort of get your thoughts as to what your definition of impact investing is, maybe even a little about how individually or within your offices you guys view family impact investing, and maybe ways that you are or are not participating in impact investing. And Andrew, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah. I think for us, we're specializing in an area that tends to be looked at as high impact, which is climate. And we're basically making a bet that we can invest in climate and not make any concessions on returns. I think a lot of times there's kind of been this perceived trade-off between high impact investing and investing purely for returns. And our bet is that basically within the climate tech space right now, for a bunch of reasons, we don't have to make that trade-off. There was like kind of a clean tech bust, if you will, like 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that left everyone with a bit of a taste in their mouth that there is this sort of trade-off in this space. And for a bunch of reasons, Michael mentioned the IRA, We don't think that's the case, and it's great to see. I'm not an expert in other areas of the economy, but I would imagine that there are other sectors where you don't have to make those trade-offs as well.
Yeah, that was really well said. I'll jump from there. So, I sold a business that I had built over 10 years, about 8.5 years ago. Had a good outcome that led to setting up the family office. And that was around the time Andrew was describing, where clean tech had melted down more or less, and there was a very little interest of whether it could be an investable asset class. I had always cared about the environment from a philanthropic perspective, and I was concerned that philanthropy was ill-equipped to solve the climate crisis in and of itself, and that it needed for-profit solutions. And so really Pond Valley was set up to invest in highly profitable, scalable climate tech that we could actively measure environmental impact, carbon emissions, toxics, water, all these things that are very quantitative. And so that's what we've been on. We've invested in energy, agriculture, geospatial intel, consumer, and went on a real learning journey to find what was available, and was very, very pleasantly surprised by how these companies were doing, by the potential of these markets. They're some of the biggest markets in the world, right? So the famous, the next 1,000 unicorns will be in climate tech quote from Larry Fink, I think is apropos. There's going to be so much in moving us from this linear system where we end up throwing out more than 90% of everything we consume to a more circular one where we have to better move throughout this global supply chains and localized supply chains, all kinds of different products, and really work to decarbonize at the scale and pace with which we need to from IPCC and others to keep planet moving forward. So, impact for me is very specifically, how are we doing? How many parts per million are there of carbon in the atmosphere? And like very quantitative measures that we can take and address and focus on with our underlying investments. And I really like that. But to pay homage to the question, their impact can mean a lot of different things. And these same principles can be applied to many different verticals. And Rahale, I may want to put some additional clarity to that.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think for me, impact has always been a really big part of my life. I grew up under the desk, so to speak, watching my father, run AllianceBernstein and then transition, or it was then Bernstein, transition to basically full-time impact work in nonprofit. And I think for me, it's always really meant bringing whatever special qualities we each have that are unique to us personally. So we all have gifts and sort of unique qualities and unique personality traits. And I think the biggest one that I tend to focus on is empathy and compassion. We live in a very disconnected world. We're hyper-connected technology-wise, but many of us feel very lonely. Mental health is sort of the biggest challenge, I think, of our time. And so for me, it's sort of, how do we focus on the people in front of us and be present with one another and add real value to each other's lives and go really deep with the people that are in our inner circles and our worlds. And just a quick story I'll share, because I think that just especially what's happened in the last number of years, we know homelessness is a huge crisis. One of the things that I have a practice of doing often is buying homeless people food. I usually don't give money because I never know what it's going to be used for, but I love buying food. And I remember once there was a woman here in Manhattan, bought her lunch and upset me. And in that moment, there was this feeling of, I restored her dignity. She was sitting there in a garbage bag. And it was one of the most impactful moments in my life of sitting there going, I didn't write a big check. I'm not sitting on any board. I didn't just, get involved in a company, but I changed her sense of self. And so I think that it's this combination of small moments of really showing up for people and practicing kindness and giving and compassion. Tikkun olam is the Hebrew term for making the world a brighter, better place. And from an investment perspective, I tend to think about how do we invest and think about companies that are solving global problems? For me personally, you know, as you mentioned, I work with Michael Smith. I'm very passionate about what they do at Regeneration, him and Dan. And I am also deeply interested in mental health and healthcare, and thinking about how we can create more equity in these systems that are very much built to the advantage of few and the disadvantage of many.
Yeah, and I know, Raquel, certainly it's not just you know, words that you do practice kindness, and certainly somebody who lives by that mantra. And it's interesting as you talk, and the three of you were talking about things like public health and mental health and climate change and impact investing and all these things. Here we are, a panel about second gens, and you know, the generation before us, those words weren't on the mind, right? That was just, these are new concepts, new things. And, you know, having spent time with a fifth generation family, you know, the patriarch certainly didn't have this on his mind. These were words that were made up. And in some cases, just not important. Not that they were good or bad, it's just the way generations are. So as you kind of look at, you know, needs from one generation to the next, what's important from one generation to the next, how do you sort of work your way through some of those issues and bring generation one along for the ride in a way where, you know, they feel that you're not just some hippie out there spending my money, but rather, you know, doing something that's important and beneficial to the growth and the legacy of the family. You know, and Raquel, I don't know if that's something maybe you want to lead here, or at least get us started.
Yeah, sure. I think I tend to have a tremendous amount of respect for patriarchs and for family legacy and ancestors, depending on how we all sort of talk about it. And when I work with families, what I see often is that there's a lot of change in each generation. And in particular, as you mentioned before, you know, this term social impact and this emphasis on philanthropy, and also I think just sort of conscious capitalism has really shifted in the last, let's call it 15 years, even more than I think ever before. And often there's a lot of challenges within families when a patriarch is used to bifurcating, investing in philanthropy. And then the next generation is thinking about, you know, investing, to Andrew's point about not compromising returns, but investing in high performing companies that are solving big problems. And so I tend to look at how do you honor legacy while also individuating and sort of handing a baton to the next generation in a way that empowers them to carry it forward. So really it's about, in my mind, respect. Respect from the younger generation to what they've learned from the prior generation or generations. And in some respects, it's the older generation letting go of some of the control and respecting the leadership of the younger generation and their maturation, and joining the family and sort of crafting the next steps in that family legacy.
That's great. Thank you. Michael or Andrew, anything to add?
I mean, I think for me, the way I sort of pay homage, I think it's definitely, it's just specific to my situation and the dynamic that we have, but I'm investing only family capital. And so I definitely feel a lot of pressure to make good investment decisions and to work really hard. And, you know, I think I honestly don't spend, the honest answer for me is that I don't spend a ton of time thinking about these dynamics. And I think the reason is just because on a day-to-day basis, I wake up and I've got the to-do lists and emails and meetings, and I just go through it all. And if I'm lucky, I have time to spend time with friends and exercise. And so I think the way I sort of think about it is just to work very hard and to try to make good investment decisions, obviously treat people well and sort of represent the family well. But I think I'm fairly kind of heads down in my approach.
Yeah, you know, and Andrew, I think you bring up a good point. And hey, look, the magic of panels like this, we pre-called a little bit and discussed some of these. And one of the questions talks about, you know, the pressure of the second gen. And so certainly many advantages to being the second generation of a wealthy family, but definitely very different, you know, pressures and challenges And so, you make a point, Andrew, to paraphrase it, there's pressure to make good investments and to work hard. But, as the three of you have sort of looked at, the challenge of honoring the legacy of the first generation, creating a legacy for the second generation, creating the path for the third generation to create their own legacy and continue the first and the second, but also just the pressure of what's expected, of second generation family members. How do you feel, you deal with that and sort of what's in place to, make that, I think, a little more tenable for second gen?
Yeah, it's a really interesting position to be in, being a second gen, right? Because you grow up in this, people call it a shadow, or however it's you want to characterize it, but having such a strong, powerful, in my case, father figure who was just so amazing in all these different ways, it was just normal almost, and totally the weight of that was very very real. In the community, everywhere I'd go, everyone just loved my dad. And I was unusual because he gave me so much opportunity within his organization to thrive. This was like the mid 90s. Digital was just happening in all of our TV stations. We had this group of 30 stations, and I got to effectively run in high school all our websites. And, I'm negotiating with people like Mark Cuban for our retransmission rights, and like doing stuff in high school that I can't even imagine what you'd normally get. And, for better or worse, I lost my dad at a young age and had to step into helping run the family business, which was a whole other dynamic and a real trial by fire and a heck of a lot of pressure. And so, what I'm excited about and what I see today is there's a lot more tools, a lot more conversations like this, a lot more community and network. I didn't have or really know anyone other than the other families that I happened to just know. And I didn't really I wasn't properly equipped, and it was very challenging. But there can be so much good if the right structures are in place, if the right values are set, if the right conditions are put for that to happen. And then even thinking about Gen 3 and beyond, there's all these other dynamics, right? So I feel really blessed later in life looking back, but in the moment, there were some really, really challenging and life-defining things that happened for me around this topic.
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much. And Arakale or Andrew, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so I actually kind of had the opposite dynamic when I was growing up, in that I had very little exposure to the family business. I really I didn't really work in finance until now, really in any sort of meaningful way. And I think 16-year-old me would have thought that I would have not liked that I sort of joined the family business a little bit and kind of am in this finance world. But the truth is, I actually like it. I mean, I think there's something kind of in my blood that it just sort of clicks with this this line of work. And as I was saying earlier, I think I would have thought that these types of issues would sort of keep me up at night if I was kind of in the family business. But really, I just don't think about it as much as I would have thought.
Yeah, 16-year-old you might not have thought you're going that route, but I'm sure you'd be happy with the outcome. But it's interesting, and I'll transition. I'll tell a minor story, but in terms of the decision making, then as you get from Gen 1 to Gen 2, and maybe we talked about the differences in the way people think through things. Be interested in sort of how you deal with maybe different approaches and decision making on whether it's investments or whatnot. And so I'll throw out that what we've done, because Gen 1 does have different issues than Gen 2 that they find important. So we've created vehicles for Gen 2 to lead the investment on their own. And they're a younger group than maybe we are here. So we allow them to pick the issues that are important in terms of impact, allow them to make the investments they feel are important. We've created the structure around them to help them do diligence and to help them sort of with the process, but have allowed, and there's another family here, very famous old family that has sort of done the same thing with each generation. They have their own source of funds that they can make investments with. So just in terms of, be interested in how you deal with those decision-making process for different generations, especially if there's maybe, I don't want to say conflict, but just differing opinions in what's important, especially in terms of impact and things like that. I don't know, Michael, if you...
I'll take that from our end. So, we put into place an investment committee within our family, and it's meets regularly to review opportunities. If someone wants to make an investment into something, draw up a memo and treat it like an institutional fund would, where we discuss it and get viewpoints and make sure that we have consensus around the investment decision for the family office to move forward. And that feels like the right and smart way for us in protocols. Not everyone is engaged, but the group that's on the committee is, and reports back to the wider family on what we've decided to invest in, and then ongoing measurement and evaluation for those investments. And we looked with foundation and philanthropy to do the same things to make sure that we're being thoughtful about where we're deploying all of our resources into a variety of initiatives. We support a couple hundred locally here in the Santa Barbara area where I'm based. And so just keeping up with that amount of philanthropies in and of itself is quite an effort. And so, the processes and regular check-ins and communication is key, and has led to a lot less confusion and overall in our processes. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So for us, we're still kind of figuring this out. So my dad started kind of what is a family investment office, I think around 6 years ago. And so he's basically involved there. Like he's seeded it, and it's now transitioning to raise outside capital. We don't have right now any family members who work in that entity, but my sisters and I each have basically investment funds that in some way are connected to our family office or family capital. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because we all work in the same industry. We all speak the same language. So we're all sort of getting reps at this, but we don't do it together. So when those times do arise that we have to make a philanthropic decision together, we don't have as many reps. So I think there's kind of trade-offs between doing things together as a family, where maybe there might lead to more arguments and things like that, versus everyone being a little bit more siloed, but you don't have as much practice working together as a family.
Yeah, Andrew, appreciate that. And, so I guess as we sort of transition now into some of the, we talked about the Gen 1 decision-making and differences in impact and things, but, I think the experience for a Gen 2 certainly is different than a Gen 1. Oftentimes a Gen 1 maybe didn't, the old shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves anecdote, maybe they didn't come from a lot of money. Maybe, they worked very hard. Gen 2 has a different issue to deal with. And oftentimes people know they're wealthy from day one, from birth. And so that can have a deep impact on, both family, but also relationships and what's expected from you and why people maybe want to get into the inner circle. So, just as we talk about wealth and the benefits, but sometimes I think some of the issues when it comes to things like, relationships, and Raquel, if you maybe could give us some thoughts as to, how you've had to deal with and other Gen 2s that you've run into relationships reflecting on the wealth that you're sort of, entitled to.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as a privilege and a responsibility. In terms of my name, I've had a recognizable name my entire life. Everywhere I go, for the most part, people put two and two together, especially because my first name is fairly unique. And so I think that when I was younger, I really struggled with it. To Andrew's earlier, my 16-year-old self wanted to get as far away from the family office world as I possibly could. I moved to Israel at 19 during the Intifada and stayed at all different places all over Europe and all over the Middle East, and went through this journey of, who do I want to be when I grow up, and how much of that do I want to bring into my life? And for a long time, really lived a very different life because I did want to disassociate from some of the issues that I saw in the wealth holder communities and in my own family. like Michael, my father died when I was young. I was 14 when my father passed away. And I think for me, there was a lot of trauma, frankly, around some things I had experienced growing up in the community. And I think also as a woman and a woman who has been married and divorced, there were challenges around, again, my last name and my inheritance. And so I think for me, there's been a tremendous amount of learning, a tremendous amount of growth over these last 15, 20 years as I've grown into it. And I think I've also really learned who my friends are. It's been a process figuring that out because I tend to be generous. And so I've learned how to pull back to some extent, to wait and see who people really are and how they show up in my life before I do too much. Something Michael and I talked about the other day, actually. And so there's just been a lot of learning. And I think at this point, for me at least, I try to just bring my full authentic self, like who I really am, and do that in every situation. But there are some boundaries that I've put into place, and it's something I hear often with a number of next gens. They'll often take their credit cards out and just pay for things. And I see many men in dating and the family office roles who talk to me privately who want to shower people with gifts or luxury trips or things of that nature. And I always tell them, don't do that. Let people get to know you for who you really are and split the bill. But if you're always paying for everything and you're in that seat of power, creates a lot of confusion in relationships over time. So one of the things that I do often is try to create some of that resourcing Michael mentioned earlier, and work with families and next gens on how to have some of these healthier boundaries and how to think about relationships and parenting and the value of every dollar, because it does change how money does change relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Raquel. Michael or Andrew, anything to add?
No, I mean, I can totally relate to a lot of the dynamics that were brought up there, and it's been interesting. My two partners in Shorewind, they have now kind of so we're at Shorewind, we're pretty public about my family's involvement in it, and with my two partners, they've been kind of going through this transition of trying to figure out, is this person, are we in this deal, or is this person, do they want to work with us because of the family or because they like me personally? And my response has kind of been like, look, you guys will drive yourselves crazy if you're going to analyze each and every relationship and trying to figure out, does this person like me for me or because of something else? And I think it's, it's something over the years I've gotten. You try to make judgment calls on that, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, and there's no right or wrong kind of line in the sand, and you just have to do what feels comfortable for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, both great insights. And I echo a lot of it. I've been in a small community here in Santa Barbara where, even though I have a generic name, everyone kind of knows who we are and what we do. And it's definitely, it definitely changes the way that you approach things. It just inevitably does. And what Andrew just said was pitch perfect. Like, you gotta focus on what moves the needle and passions and where you want to make a difference in this world. And if you can do that and build confidently around that, sometimes it's going to help, sometimes it's going to be a distraction, but just having that focus and goal is the best thing that you can do around the topic. And because it is so complex and it does have so many dynamics. And if you think about it too much, it will not inevitably lead to good things. So having that focus and being in partnership, with your family and not working against is also really important. Like getting to the root of what some of the alignments are, right? Like how do we do this? How do we function? Having real conversations around that is super important.
Yeah, and I think, Michael, you make a great point, and it's great. Certainly for you and the panelists to discuss, but also I think it leads into, how do you deal with the next generation as parents, and I don't know, and Raquel, I know this is an area close to you and in your heart, but how do you deal with sort of that next generation as a parent now, with sort of all these issues we discussed, and how do you set your children up for sort of the issues they may face, and then being successful in their own right?
I'm happy to start. I guess in our home, for me, rituals were very important from when my children were very, very young. So I've been volunteering with often a baby carrier and a stroller for years, because I wanted my children to learn how to give back from a really early age. And I believe in that being tangible and something they can actually experience. So they actually work at a food pantry pretty much every week, and I have pictures of them at varying ages running around with, bags of oranges and other things, and they'll never forget that. So for them, they know that there's a position of community service, gratitude, and sort of these ingrained values. And since they were also very young, for me, there's been a focus on financial literacy and earning their own way. I meet a lot of next gens who frankly are very lost because they never had to work. They weren't in a position where they had chores or responsibilities. And I didn't have that when I was growing up. I was very much overindulged. And so I kind of learned how to parent by what not to do in some ways. And so at our home, we have 3 jars. One is save, one is spend, and one is charity, or tzedakah in Hebrew. And I give them actual bills because I want them, again, to have that experience and then to remember that. And so whenever they've asked me for things over the years, I tell them to go back to their jars and see if they've earned enough, or to make a list and wait for a holiday or a birthday. And so there's just been this consciousness around the value of every dollar and of hard work, and also around why giving back is so important. So I think for me, those elements have been very sort of front and center since they were very young.
I may take some of those ideas from Rachalea. I love it. Brilliant. I've got a almost 8-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. And my wife and I think about this and talk about this on a daily basis. It is not easy giving the same sort of like high quality upbringing that you want to bring to them and show them all the things that you want them to see, and try to explain the dual complicatedness of, we have this amazing life where we get to go and see and do all these things, and then have them see homelessness on the streets and the inequities and all these challenges that children are very open to and pick up on. And so this is something we work on very actively. We're being strategic in terms of screens and sharing and other families, and working to bring them around people that we really think are all share equal or like similar values of things. But it will be a lifelong process. And we're just starting to get to the point where they're getting very sophisticated with how they see the world. And it brings up a lot of stuff from my childhood as well, and some of it's very healing and connected, and some of it's quite challenging as well. So I'm enjoying the process, and I'm learning, and I love getting tips from people like Rachalea about how to parent better as well.
If I can add one quick anecdote that I thought was funny from the other evening. I was sitting around the table. So I have 4 children. They're 9, 11, 13, and 15 because I'm highly organized. And my 13-year-old says at the Shabbat dinner, he goes, we're very spoiled. And I look at him and I was like, would you like one fewer meal a day? Or what is it that you mean by that? And he said, well, we go on all these amazing trips, to what Michael just said, and we have our beautiful home and we have this amazing life, and look at everyone out there. And I said to him, well, I think what you mean is you're really blessed. I think that let's reframe that and think about how you can take all these blessings and create more good in the world with what you have. And so then we started a conversation about sort of each of their personalities and their quirks and the things they enjoy, and how they can take that and do more good in the world. But I did think his self-awareness was very positive at a young age. And, as opposed to, I think, living in a bubble, he recognizes sort of how fortunate he is. And so he wants to cure cancer. So we're hoping that that will happen sometime in the next few decades. So he has some positive aspirations there. But it's an ongoing conversation always. And, you know, us personally, and I know other families like this have made certain choices around the type of home we live in or the cars we drive to try and minimize some of it for them so that the bubble isn't sort of too isolated and too insular.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andrew, anything to add?
So I don't have kids yet. I think soon, hopefully. But I think I am grateful that I have time to strategize and think about this stuff. And there's people I can lean on for their advice, like you guys. And it does make me think, just from my parents' perspective, they were coming into a lot of wealth as they were raising us, and so they were dealing with a lot of this stuff on the fly. So I am grateful that I have time to strategize and think about it. Not that that's going to make it, you know, any easier. But yeah, I mean, I think about these things too, like the cars you drive, the houses you live in, but still trying to instill those values of remaining humble and working hard. And I'm sure it's tough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, as we sort of near the end of this panel discussion, let's bring it full circle and talk a little. You know, we talked obviously about decision making and family dynamic, and you know the challenges each generation will face. And we also talked about, obviously, on the investment side. But given everything that we talked about today, impact investing, and then, you know, broaden it out even further into the world that we face today, which is unique and different, even just from a year ago, from a geopolitical and economic and social aspect. Bringing all that together, how do you think that's going to affect, you know, your decision making, your approach, you know, to investing as we go forward here in the next 12, 24 months? And Andrew, maybe I'll pick on you to lead this off.
Yeah, I think definitely, I think you're going to see impact investing and investing for returns. I think that the center of that Venn diagram is going to grow a lot over time. And I think government and regulation is going to play a role in that, particularly in climate. I think for me, part of the question is as I continue in my investment career, which I will probably always kind of be somewhat around the family, is do I still want to prioritize kind of that the center of that Venn diagram, or drift more to just we're looking purely for returns? And I think that's probably something that a lot of family offices deal with, because they have flexible mandates where they can invest in anything from early stage privates to publics. And so that trying to kind of hone in on your vision as a family office, or just as individuals within a family office, I think is pretty key to help kind of guide you towards exactly how you want to spend your time.
Yeah, I'll go next. So for us, we won't change how we've been doing things in the next 12 to 24 months. When I've started, you know, focusing on the same issue as Andrew and climate, I got to know what was happening with this crisis in a way that really motivated me to fully focus on doing everything I could to address it. Regeneration and our work with Pond Valley is really an expression of that. And it's not a short-term issue. This is very much a long view issue. So, you know, our goal is thinking how over the next 10, 20, 50 years, how do we move the needle on putting atmospheric carbon back into natural systems and regenerating planet and building more resilient structures and adapting to changes we're already feeling right now. And so the time is not to slow down now, depending on all the different indicators and where they're going. Like, this is really urgent and important work that we do. We take it very, very seriously. And so anyone who's interested, check out regeneration.vc. Love to know more about what you're doing, if it can be, advantageous, or we can partner and collaborate. It's a global issue. So, we're looking globally and in all these different sectors around consumer industries. So love to know more about, what this folks watching are doing too, and look forward to collaborating.
So Rob, I think that the last 2 to 3 years, for me personally, how it's impacted how I think, One is I've been passionate about child protection and child sexual abuse prevention and impact investing through munis for years. But I think during COVID, I was especially terrified, and I use that word deliberately, because children globally were essentially locked up, often with people that locked up, often with
Absolutely. And as we are at the end of the time, I want to first off, thank Jason Ho and his team for putting this all together. But thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this and hear the opinions. But obviously, to Andrew, to Michael, and to Rahalea, thank you so much. For your bringing your passion and your experience and your knowledge to this discussion today. And certainly wish you best of luck as you tackle some pretty serious and heavy topics and issues, but are having some serious impact as well in creating change and creating the things that we need to see in the world. And I, can't thank you enough for that, but also the energizing sort of impact you have on, I think, people listening to this, because you're not just sitting back saying, hey, got a ton of money, I'll just hang out. You're making direct impact. You're doing some great things. So appreciate that and appreciate all your comments today. And I think with that, we'll say thank you and hope everybody enjoyed the discussion today. I know the three panelists have said if you want to reach out, go ahead and reach out, but to your benefit, because they're three great people. Thank you so much for everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our roundtable, and my name is Roy, and moderator of today's roundtable. And it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to be a moderator here and to talk with three outstanding female investors. So before we start, I would like to say all three guests in this roundtable are kind of related to Forbes in one way or another. So we got Miss Helen Wang from AC Ventures, and she was one of Forbes China's top investors list. And we got Ms. Chen Shuo from IOVC, and she was the 2022 Forbes Under 30. And also we got Miss Gwen Regina, and she's from Binance. And we know that Binance announced an investment in Forbes early this year. So, and as for me, I'm an editor at Forbes China. So we're all related to Forbes in one way or another. That's kind of interesting. So a commitment to advanced female leadership is not something new. That's not something new to Forbes. And we've always remained committed to spotlighting women on the front lines of progress. And this roundtable is to show the power and size of female and who can help us to build a more resilient and stronger future and while we face an unprecedented time of challenge and uncertainty. So our topic is She Invests. So we're going to talk about what she invests, why she invests, and how she invests in this roundtable. And first, I would like to ask our guests to give a brief introductions about themselves and share what they've been doing recently. So let's start with Ms. Wong, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Wong, managing partner at AC Ventures. AC Ventures is a Southeast Asia-focused early-stage venture capital firm. Before AC Ventures, I spent about 20 years in the venture capital industry. I started as part of the founding team at GGV Capital, and then I moved to Chiming Ventures, where I was a partner at Chiming for the past 8 years. I just recently relocated back to Singapore and joined AC Ventures. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Ms. Wong. And Ms. Chen?
First of all, thanks so much for hosting, Roy, and it's a pleasure and honor to share the stage with Helen and Gwendolyn. So my name is Shuo. I'm a general partner at IOVC. We've been based out of Silicon Valley for the past decade, predominantly investing in pre-Series A, so everything seed and pre-seed into early stage enterprise SaaS startups. I actually started my career as an entrepreneur, had our company acquired, and post that, I was with Goldman Sachs, where I covered some of our largest technology clients, and fast forward for the past 10 years have been really on the venture side. Outside of my full-time venture role, I've also been teaching on the faculty at UC Berkeley. I helped start our entrepreneurship program under the College of Engineering and have been teaching here for the past decade plus. And it's been really fun to see my students getting younger and younger every day and see myself getting older and older every day.
You're still very young.
Excited too. Excited to learn from everyone on this panel today.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chen. And Ms. Regina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Roy, for having us. So my name is Gwen, and I'm investment director in BNB Chain. So BNB Chain, we are a blockchain smart contract platform with the largest Web3 community, 1 million daily active users. My role there is to really try to grow the BNB Chain community as well as crypto and Web3 in general. So when we invest across the board. We really like looking at early stage projects, early stage companies who are building core infrastructure, web dev tooling for blockchain in general. We also invest at the application layer where, it's not just financial support, but also non-monetary resource. As an ecosystem player, that's very, very important for us, where again, we're really thinking about how can we grow Web3 together because we're so super nascent. And my background in general have been across being an entrepreneur as well as investor for the last 17 years, where I also started a company, had it acquired, was also fortunate to have started an investment fund a long time ago in collaboration with the Singapore government, done several things where I led market expansion as well, being an entrepreneur, also work with deep tech founders to build companies. So always, kind of like looking at the technology space from really several angles, being an entrepreneur, and investor. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Regina. And we know that the crypto world is going through a tough time right now. And how's that affecting your investment and future plan?
Actually, bear market, crypto winters are one of the best times to really invest. For a few things, right? One, there's less noise. So I actually have more time to, when I filter, there's less to filter, number one. Number two, when I filter is less like, wow, in 15 minutes, you're like, wow, okay, this is good or this is bad, right? And there's less to go through, faster to filter because it's just less task switching to some extent. And now this is a time where if you're still around, the good people, the good builders are still building. So this is one of the best times to be talking to companies.
And what are some of the prominent challenges that you have to deal with when you do the investment right now?
In crypto or in general?
Well, in crypto, Web3, and yeah.
Well, valuations have gone down, so that's good. It's less frothy right now. I would say challenges is still, I wouldn't say just challenge in general. I think just in general, you always want to look for good teams and good projects. I think the key thing about the crypto industry is that a lot of things are evolving. We're seeing right now, more and more innovations coming in, because we saw like the DeFi, NFT, GameFi summer, so to speak, like almost separate kind of periods of growth. But now you're seeing more confluence, which is much more interesting, right? But at the same time, it's also where all of us are co-creating the Web3 industry as we go along, because there's a lot of unknowns now. So I think one of the greatest challenges is almost like you have to future sense. You have to look at the project in front of you, and like this, a lot of these are very, very technical. I'm not technical enough, for example, right? So you almost have to like, okay, let's take a step back. What's the core fundamentals here that's being created? What's the composability factor, leading to Web3, right? And so we bring in tech people to also kind of review it. And there's always, in general, I guess, technology investments, you always want to make sure you understand the product and the tech. And the same goes for Web3. It's just that there's still a lot more unknowns, I think, in Web3.
Yeah, but right now the security problem is kind of people that worry about, because we know there's a lot of hacks happened recently. Like in the first half years, like we lost like about a lot of money because
a lot of money,
the hacks. Yeah.
Hundreds of millions, almost 1 billion, I think, already for this year. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but security is a very, very important part. And BNB Chain, we're doing a lot to try to make sure that security education is there for everyone, but also making sure that builders are thinking about, say, the UI, UX, making it less easy for users to make mistakes, right? And just in general, so future-proofing the core protocols. We're working with projects to have APIs that links to Red Alarm is this project that we have, a website that highlights suspicious projects to users. So there's a lot of security that we're trying to do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Regina, for sharing. And Ms. Wong, and we know people are talking about Southeast Asia for years. And why did you choose to join AC Ventures this year? In February, right? If I remember right.
I joined AC Ventures, not East.
Yeah,
AC Ventures. And first of all, I'm from Singapore, so for me it was part of coming home to where I first started. And then secondly, actually, the last 5 years, I already started to cover Southeast Asia out of Shanghai at Qiming, because we saw that the internet market had matured in China, but the internet market was really picking up steam in Southeast Asia. As you probably know, like a country like Indonesia already has about 70% internet penetration. So we feel like it's a good time to be investing in this part of the world. And I think it's in the past been a bit more neglected, as most investors flock to China and to maybe India. So Southeast Asia still presents good opportunities in a less competitive environment. So that's why I decided to join AC Ventures.
You mentioned about opportunities. Did you find any new opportunities in the past 6 months?
Yes, we have done quite a few deals in the past 6 months as well. Yeah, we have quite a few from fintech to B2B marketplace, as well as some ESG investments, one in waste management. So there's quite a wide range of industries where we see exciting opportunities.
Yeah, I know fintech is one of the areas that is developing fast in Southeast Asia, right? Do we have any progress in that sector?
Yes, a lot. I personally invested in Akulaku at a pretty early stage. This company has scaled very well to become a unicorn, and they have a wide range of services from the sort of buy now, pay later or installment financing to the digital bank, which is also a listed company, as well as to insurance products. So they are becoming a full-fledged financial services platform.
And I guess there's going to be a lot of competitiveness right there, right? Right now, because people are going to go to the gold rush in Southeast Asia.
Well, on the whole, I mean, I spent most of my career in China, which I think is a lot more, has a lot more capital and a lot more competitive intensity. So I would say that in Southeast Asia, I still think that it is far less of a competitive environment than China.
Got it. Thank you, Ms. Wong. So, Ms. Chen, you have been investing in startups with focus on how people work together in the future. So, why do you choose this sector?
Yeah, actually, right before I dive in, I was about to say, actually, I can see a lot of overlap of our work here, even though I'm based out of Silicon Valley, a lot of overlap between the work that we do here with Gwen as well with Helen. So if I'm looking at underlying flow of talent, I've certainly seen a lot more people take the pandemic as an opportunity to relocate elsewhere and also explore opportunities in other sectors. I was actually out in Southeast Asia myself just earlier this year because I've had a lot of former portfolio founders or previous former students that have relocated out to Southeast Asia. So certainly lots of opportunities out there now. Even when I look at the DeFi crypto space, this is where Southeast Asia has certainly been ahead of what we've done here in the US. It was only as of earlier this year that President Biden had signed an executive order supporting Web3 innovation. And California actually, as of a little over a month ago, became the first state in the US to also have a governor sign an executive order supporting Web3 innovation. I actually just taught a program for about 50 senators and state legislators here in California, basically thinking through how to translate the executive order into actual legislation around regulatory frameworks for fintech and DeFi. So lots more to talk about in that space there if there's interest later on. As you mentioned, future of work is kind of a broader space that I invest in. I would say this has predominantly been our investment thesis out of Fund 1 and Fund 2. As we're going into Fund 3, we've actually noticed a lot of what we had considered 10 years ago as future of work have already materialized. And of course, the pandemic had helped expedite that. So I think going to Fund 3 will actually be even more specifically focused. So previously, when we talked about future of work, we're actually referring to 4 very specific areas, and everyone defines it differently. So I'm sure there will be plenty of people who thinks that there's additional things that I'm not mentioning or things that I'm breaking down. But the 4 areas we've been focused on is number 1 being digital transformation. How do we help legacy companies that have historically worked with honestly very bad software expedite so that it's actually a pleasant experience for employees? It's more efficient and time efficient and actually a good user experience. That's something that we've seen change a lot in the last 10 years. It's no longer the same as before, where employees showed up and expected to use Windows XP with extremely legacy software. So fortunately, we've seen a lot more SaaS adoption. So that is becoming more of what we've done in the past and less focused on going in the future. And the remaining 3 that we've been investing in is what is done when we go to work. I'm really referring to how does automation augment the work that we do? So what are the pieces that we automate and what are the pieces that we actually do need humans to focus on? So things like SaaS, that includes components of AI to automate, but also with a human-enabled component where we say, let's use AI, for example, to identify for employee behavior and give personalized coaching recommendations for how employees can improve. This specific startup is the company called Torch. We did that investment almost 10 years ago. They're now post-Series C and have been working with some of the largest companies in the world like Twitch, Reddit, Visa, et cetera. The third area we invest in is really kind of thinking about hybridization of workplace, which is where we do our actual work. That has obviously expedited with the pandemic. So fortunately, a lot of the companies we had done, again, 10 years ago are now kind of coming into fruition. And then the last one that we've been focusing on is diversification of workforce. We're not talking about diversity in the traditional sense. Of course, it includes women and other underrepresented minorities, but it also means diversity in the sense of what are the new values that are going to be in focus in the workplace. Things like ESG, things like DEIB, and especially bringing the belonging piece. So digital transformation, automation of work, hybridization of workplace, and diversity of workforce. Those are our 4 areas.
Got it. So as you just mentioned, you also spend some time or a lot of the time doing education work. Is that right?
So one day a week or one afternoon a week is when I teach.
So that's your hobby, or that's what we're going to do in the future?
When I was an entrepreneur, when I was running a startup, I had coincidentally started sharing a lot of lessons I had learned as an entrepreneur, and I was invited to join the faculty at UC Berkeley. I had originally taught under the business school and then got poached by the College of Engineering. And I kept on doing that as a way of giving back. But honestly, over time, selfishly, I've learned so much from my students, because if we're investing in the future, the best way to learn about what the future looks like is to teach and learn from the generation that's going to be running the future. So I've learned a lot from my students now. I get about 40% grad students, which are more normally aged, but I get 60% undergrads. They're all born post-2000, and they're incredibly impressive. This is the first batch of students this semester I've gotten where 90% of them plus have had some form of entrepreneurial experience already before they even came into class. That was never the case before. But now I have students who have started their own companies, interned at much larger companies. Some of them even have gotten their smaller startups acquired before. I have a student in this class where they run an online slime business that brings in $4 million in revenue every month, not every year. So I have some really, really impressive post-2000 kids in my class.
So that's a good way to learn from this Z
generation,
people. I would say.
Gen Z, strawberry generation as well. That's what we call them. No, I guess,
yeah.
Future founders, future CEOs, I guess.
Yeah, right. So here's the question for our three guests. So when it comes to investment, do you think that women can make different results from men? And if so, how does the difference happen? And let's start with Ms. Wong.
I'm not sure that women actually make different results from men. I think women are just as capable as men, but I think that in certain areas, women are maybe more in tune with, let's say, what the female consumer or the average consumer wants. And so in like a consumer internet sector and some of the pure consumer plays that we've seen, I think women investors are pretty good. I think that in general, I wouldn't say that there's a gender bias. I would just say that definitely I've seen very good and people who are very good at analyzing business models that are female, and I've seen very good ones that are male as well. So I personally think that we just shouldn't have this gender bias towards investing. Yeah.
So that you're just all investors, and just there's no difference between women or men. They're just doing the same jobs, doing the same work. Good.
Well, yeah, I think on the whole, yes, but I would say that there are maybe certain characteristics which are different. So, for example, on the board, right, of a company, I think that female board members I've seen tend to be more, have more empathy. They are able to have put aside the egos, and generally a lot of female board members I've seen don't have as big an ego as some of the male counterparts, and so they are able to communicate a lot more effectively, maybe sometimes with the founders, especially in very difficult situations. So I find that to be maybe a slight characteristic, but I would say it's a generalization that I'm just putting across here.
Yeah. Got it. So Ms. Chen, how do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Helen that it's really hard to kind of put stereotypes to what female founders versus male founders are like. Because I've definitely seen folks that break the stereotype, whether they are female founders or male founders. But high level, I would say a couple things. Number one is definitely acknowledging the fact that female founders have received less funding, at least in the US. That's the area I'm familiar with. In fact, throughout the pandemic, we've seen that actually out of all the venture capital that has been written out, just in terms of proportional split, more money has actually gone to male founders throughout the pandemic and less money than before in history written to female founders. So that's definitely factually correct, which I think means that there is an opportunity to identify female founders running startups that are relatively undervalued just because female founders as a population are receiving less capital. And then the second part is that we've seen in data here in the US over a decade-long longitudinal study that basically co-founding teams that have a female co-founder on the team tend to be 67% more likely to stay alive 10 years later than if it was an all-male team. And then the last stat that we've seen on a board level, which Helen brought up, and I absolutely agree, that on American boards of public companies, if they have one additional female board member, they are significantly less likely as a company to get into situations of fraud and get in trouble and be persecuted for all of that. So I think it is proven, whether it is among co-founders or among board members, that additional diversity of thought is helpful. And of course, we want to expand that beyond female founders too, right? Whether it's, of course, this is less of an issue in Asia, but more so of an issue in the US, underrepresented minorities. Asian Americans definitely are underrepresented here in the US. And of course, we have underrepresented minorities, other categories. But if I were to just focus on the numbers I'm familiar with here in the US, Asian American VCs actually manage less than 3% of total AUM, even though we have demonstrated that, as a subsegment, Asian Americans typically generate outsized returns. So there's definitely an opportunity for improvement for underrepresentation when you slice it in different ways, for sure.
Yeah, so you brought up a point, which is female get less funds than male when it comes to doing the startup. So, Ms. Regina, do you think set up female-focused funds to support investing in female-led startups is a good way to promote women entrepreneurship?
Female-focused funds, I mean, to each our own, right? I think there are many funds, both, without bias agenda, and as well as female-focused funds and funds that focus on investing underrepresented minorities are all good in different ways. I do think that there's some positivity to almost like positive discrimination, because like Shuo here has really talked through a lot of stats. We've seen all these across the board, and it is a fact of life, right? There's some systemic bias against underrepresented minorities in general. So I think while myself, I probably would not do a focus. I think my focus is always on core technology. I mean, the word is out, right? Maybe later on, but yeah, for people focusing on women-focused funds, yeah, sure, why not? Because looking at a targeted segment does really make sure that you are more open-minded, almost, right? You're almost forcing your team and the people who are joining your fund to be more open-minded. It's almost like a key thing, right? If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, you will think of a pink elephant, right? So not saying that investing in underrepresented minorities, females or others included, but more like, yeah, there is a certain positive to be said about female-focused fund.
So yeah, so in addition to the female-focused funds, do you think there's other better ways to promote female entrepreneurship in this ecosystem?
Yeah, many different ways. So just in general, we need education of all the stats that Shuo again mentioned, and the point that Helen mentioned as well, the empathy on boards and stuff like that, right? This is education that we need across the board to males as well. So I'm glad here, Roy, that you are male, right? And this female investor panel. It would be nice also if we had like a male investor to provide some perspective, but of course there's only three panelists, 3 slots, right? So yeah, so I do think that there is value to just be more inclusive from the get-go and just educate the non-represented, the non-minorities essentially. So in this particular case, talking about gender, we just need more people, more males, females to be more aware, because it's not just that, we cannot assume that just because you're female, you know that there is a lack or know that we're underrepresented. It's sometimes you also, this is a gender-free bias to some extent. So yeah, so we do need both more females and even more males to be just more aware of all the stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you used to work in Meta, right, as the head of VC programs. So how do you see the big tech's situation when in dealing with the gender balance?
Yeah, so in terms of gender balance in general, it is something that, again, across the board is talked about, right? There's an knowledge and awareness that, hey, let's really make sure, which parts of societies are unrepresented, right? So when you even talk about, say, from an investing point of view, I would say that a lot of times we're also looking at founders from a certain socioeconomic background. that's a different kind of underrepresented minority, right? You know, do we want to search out the core, a good talent that may not have had the opportunities that, you know, others have, right? So I think that, again, the whole idea about underrepresented, and I don't want to focus on females specifically. It is really just a topic that I think has really taken big tech, but also taken the investing world in general, right? There, I think across the board, there is a general awareness again to find these gems, because gems really are everywhere, right? It's just whether you open your eyes to them or not.
Yeah. So, Ms. Wong and Ms. Chen, and you've have a lot of experience and been doing research about entrepreneurs and companies. How do you assess? What's your assessment about the current situation of the women leadership, either in VC or in other sectors?
Yeah.
So what's your
Yeah, I think, you know, when I started my career in venture capital in Silicon Valley, I still remember a very, you know, prominent VC who was male. He told me that, you know, it's harder to succeed as a female VC. And the reason is that most of the founders were male and they prefer a male VC. So I think it's sometimes, you know, it's chicken and egg, right? Do you have female founders, funds, female GP funds that would invest more in women, or would you have more, you know, female founders and then making it easier for females to become GPs as well, right? So I think nonetheless, I mean, what I would say is that when I came to China, it was quite a pleasant change, because there was actually a lot more women in the workforce in China and in VC as well. Even though, you know, we are still the minority, but I think on the whole, there have been very successful female VCs in China. And so somehow is less of a, I think, a topic of discussion. But I do think that over time, what I've seen is that there's been a lot more awareness of this issue, and a lot more emphasis on trying to do the right thing, which I think is very good. You know, I think it's good both for women and as well as for the funds that, you know, may have overlooked a certain demographic group, right? So I do believe that, you know, we're moving in the right direction. At AC Ventures, we found that we have 40% of our founders are female, and 40% of the ones in high senior management positions are also female. So, and this is without, you know, setting up any gender-focused fund, and even prior to me joining the firm. So I think that a lot of progress has been made, and it would be nice if one day we don't even have to talk about this topic, and we just have no gender bias at all.
Yeah. So, Ms. Chen, do you think the progress is enough for now?
You know, I think Helen's absolutely right that there is definitely a gap between what we see in Asia versus what we see in North America. Based out of California myself, I still see that our numbers are where female GPs represent single-digit percentage in terms of decision makers of all venture capital funding. So we're definitely by far in the minority here, whereas I think for Asian-based funds, our numbers look a lot better. And I think it's for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it's significantly more expensive and harder to find help in the US. And so many families where after they have children, women are forced to spend more time doing childcare work. In fact, we had research coming out of universities just over the past couple of years where they said even for gender equal couples where they equally split housework previous to marriage, that once they had kids, on average, women were spending 30 hours more every single week on childcare related work after having kids. So as equal as they are previous to marriage, I think when kids come around, there's just a lot more that take up women's time. So I think there's more work that we need to do here in the US in terms of learning best practices from Asia for sure. The second thing I think is that when we actually think about how to further support more female founders, there are ripple effects, right? So if women GPs and female investors only represent less than 10% of all the decision makers, then it's probably going to be harder, just like Helen said, to have this chicken and egg issue of, well, how do you support more female founders if male investors just don't understand these issues as well? Particularly as it relates to women's health in the US, because of how ethnically diverse the country is, oftentimes most of our healthcare samples are based off of older white men as opposed to women of minorities. So female minorities are much more likely to suffer health incidents because we just don't even prescribe medicine at the right kind of dosage amount. So I think it's understanding those issues and certainly having LPs play a bigger part in terms of allocating more funding towards initiatives that would support female founders. In the interest of time, I'll wrap up kind of this last point really quickly. The last thing I think, as we think about supporting female founders, is making sure that we have an equitable system set up from day one instead of building a product. I think we're all familiar with the concept of technical debt. So if you keep on building on legacy systems, that technical debt just builds up further and further. But I think I have a lot of faith in younger generations from day one, not having that diversity debt from day one, because I think at least the Gen Z founders that I work with now are much more thoughtful about including a diverse team from day one. And when you have a diverse team of co-founders, they're more likely to hire a more diverse team of employees. And those kind of effects ripple throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Can I add on a little bit, Roy? Just because in the Web3 space, you have more and more people now working with just avatars and PFPs, like profile pictures. So it's getting even more anonymized, right? I mean, there's pseudo-anonymity as well. But I think the gender thing, same with everyone here. I think, like, I hope that I would never have to speak on a women panel at some point again. Right, it will be some other topic that is more important, kind of thing. I mean, this is still important, but yeah. So I think in the Web3 space, I think there's a lot more younger generation, more Gen Zs does as well, sure. And just in general, like, people are much more like, what have you done online? That's really what that matters. Your online credentials.
Yeah. As I get your point, the gender is like, probably people just don't mention too much about gender. Just talk about what it's been doing and what value they have been creating for this society, and to get people to live a better life. That's what people care about, I think.
And so, of course, because we're in California, I feel like I have to mention this point, which is many people now, especially on the West Coast, will say, why are we even splitting people into two genders? There are people who don't fall into either of these buckets. So given the hippies that we are here at Berkeley, I feel compelled to share that perspective too.
Yeah, so we talk about the Gen Z, and we have a lot of Gen Z investors and entrepreneurs emerging and coming up right now. So there are a lot of new generations of females are also taking the seats at the table. So in your opinion, what kind of new characteristics do you see in these young female investors and entrepreneurs? Let's start with Ms. Chen, because you're the youngest here.
So what are our characteristics that we find to be most compelling that lead to us investing? Or if I can ask you to clarify the question a little bit more.
Well, it's either investors or entrepreneurs, that the young female investors or the young female entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I guess the most exciting characteristics that I see about emerging entrepreneurs now is that they break stereotypes in every way possible. So if there were historically majors that you don't see a lot of women in, I certainly see Gen Z really taking classes and majors of all different types. So historically, if we've seen underrepresentation in STEM majors, that is becoming less and less the case. In fact, we're seeing numbers here in the US that women on average do better in academic institutions than men do. So I'm seeing a lot of great female students that are now majoring in computer science and data science and in these new emerging areas that didn't even exist just a couple of years ago. In fact, when I look at the latest data that's been at least published here out of the US, our findings are that actually 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 weren't even invented just 5 years ago. And I think that's pretty evident when we look at some of the C-suite positions now. Many people are in C-suite positions that didn't exist when they graduated from school. For example, a longtime friend of mine, he was head of data science at LinkedIn before he got poached by Coinbase. And data science was not a field that really just existed even just 10 years ago. You would be a math major, and either you go into finance and work on Wall Street, or you work in economics at another financial institution like the Central or Reserve Bank. And other than that, there weren't a lot of other options, whereas now data science is becoming increasingly important. So when I look at female founders, I certainly see them going into these new fields more so than ever before. I serve on the board of Decode, which is the largest entrepreneurship community that's co-hosted between Berkeley and Stanford. And I get the fortune of really serving on the board alongside the CTO of Microsoft US, the Chief Privacy Officer at Google. I mean, Chief Privacy Officer, that was not a position that existed. And I see more women entering data privacy than ever before. So when I look at female founders, I'm excited to see them come from more diverse backgrounds and breaking these stereotypes.
Good. So how do you think, Ms. Wong and Ms. Regina? Well, what's your opinion about this topic?
To be honest, I think from what I understand, the barriers to women getting to the top in VC or being founders is really at the later stage, right? As they try to move up the the ladder. And I think that the challenges are probably twofold. One is just the fact that there is a lot of people in the hierarchy who are male, who might have some bias, and two, it's actually regarding the child rearing part, which unfortunately, because women are the ones who are going to be the ones giving birth, and if you have a few children, it really takes a lot of time and energy away from your career. And I think those part is very hard to change, right? The latter part. I think that in my role as a managing partner here, I have started to do some mentoring for these more junior, investors, junior team members who are facing these challenges, right? I mean, how do you have work-life balance? Should I focus more on having children, right? Especially if you reach an age where having children is getting more and more difficult, or like, how do I make sure that, my husband doesn't mind that maybe I have an even better job than him and I get more recognized. I mean, I know Asia on the whole is much better than, maybe other countries, but you still have these, maybe outdated ideas, right? That somehow, you can't be stronger than your husband, and what would the husband think? So, so I think those are some of the issues that I have been very aware and trying to help them, as I share with them how I kind of went through my own personal challenges to manage, have this work-life balance. So I think that's the probably one of the things that, the senior members can do for the younger generation. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So, Ms. Regina, you got any?
Yeah. Both Helen and Shuo brought up really, really good points. A lot to add there, but I think the one thing I really want to focus on is that in the Web3 space, when we look at founders right now, we're seeing different, if you talk about gender, kind of different, there's a different focus. For example, in NFT collections, NFT related startups, so non-fungible tokens, you see more females. It's just so happens, right? So it could be just interest, could be, more interest in art and stuff like that. I don't know. But yeah, we see more female founders in those spaces. So that's interesting in terms of a difference in the kinds of projects that the younger generation is kind of taking on.
Yeah, because right now we really need, we're still in progress, but we really need like more and more female like role models coming out and to give people a shout out like, okay, hey, you can do this and you have the ability, you have the potential to do this thing, and not just like limit yourself and to try the things that you want. So last question. Yeah.
Roy, sorry, that last point you made, I think is so important. I genuinely think we should better feature role models like Helen and Gwen here, because it's really hard to be what you can't see. So if you never even knew that this was a possibility, how can you ever even aspire to be that? I had no idea what venture capital was for most of my educational career. I think it was really after I had accidentally stumbled into entrepreneurship that I even knew that being an investor was a career path. So I think getting exposure as early as possible to all these career options and seeing other amazing women is such an important point.
Yeah, I think that's one of your questions to young entrepreneurs. So what's your other advice for like young entrepreneurs or young investors when they start their careers?
Please, I'll let Helen and Gwen.
Okay, let's start with Ms. Wong.
Well, I think just, not to let any gender bias, prevent you from achieving your dream, right? Just to, I know that you might encounter it, but, it's definitely not something that should hold you back. And do, like, Sheryl Sandberg shared, right? Do try to lean in, right? Do try to see if there are other people that can help you. It's not just like you don't feel that everything is just falling on your own shoulders, right? Whether it's childcare or whether it's other aspects, right? Finding people to help you along the way, to mentor you, people who have gone through the same challenges as you, I think would be very helpful.
So, Ms. Regina, what's your advice?
Yeah, I would say that if you face bias, it reflects more on them than you, right? So don't let that affect your own self-confidence and stuff like that. But second, I think practically as well, because there is, I would say just general like lack of awareness, right? So in a sense, ignorance. So sometimes the people making that bias is just not aware, right? So doing some education on your part, also helps the other person, and the other person actually will be grateful. Like, hey, thank you for pointing out. I didn't realize I was biased against XYZ, right? I think third is when you think about your your career and doing things, is that I think on a practical level, because it's all this systemic, say for example, sexism and again racism and what have you, right? I for the female side of things, I have found it helpful to have a group of fellow female founders and investors, right? In the same, thinking about the same problems on a daily basis. Because I do think there is, we cannot deny that there are gender differences, right? Male, female, non-binary, and what have you, right? And just very broadly speaking, there are different ways to connect as friends, as quote unquote networking, and stuff like that. And I've just really found that the group of fellow female, again, like tech executives, very helpful because we talk practical stuff, right? So we talk about child rearing, it's like actual practical stuff. Who can you recommend your help, right? And also then we also make sure to involve our male partners, for example, in the conversation, right? And so I think that it's just not just your own mindset, but also practically, if you find the different ways, seek mentorship, right? For all these practical stuff, and that will help the day-to-day life as well.
Got it. And Ms. Chen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Helen and Gwen more. Oftentimes it's hearing how other people have gone through their firsthand challenges that make it a lot more manageable for you. So I would certainly agree with that relationship building piece. In fact, I was talking to one of the C-suite at Google who said, one of the top things that people don't even talk about that are challenges for women is also even conceiving a child. And most people don't even realize how difficult that process is. Because this particular individual I've spoken to, he had tried 7 years with his wife, who also works at Google, to even conceive a child. So being able to have these open conversations about things that are taking your attention away from work is so important. I'm also the primary caretaker, or have also been the primary caretaker for my grandparents for the past couple of years. And that's another source of responsibility that oftentimes fall on women rather than on men taking care of elderly, right? So whether we're talking about taking care of younger generations or older generations, and these time sucks away from work and making sure that it feels manageable, it's so important to have people who are mentors who can be helpful in that process. But the practical takeaway here I would mention is, if relationship building or even the concept of networking feels like too much, I think just break it down into a super manageable piece that you feel like you can repeat on either a weekly or monthly basis. For example, if it means reaching out and catching up with someone once a month, if that feels manageable, then stick to that and make sure you do it once a month. If that feels like too much, make it once a quarter. Every quarter, reach out to someone and make sure you maintain that relationship. So if you just set one area of focus that you feel like is important and helpful to you and stick to that habit and repeat it on a regular basis, that adds up to tremendous benefits in the long run. And I couldn't recommend that more.
Okay, well, thank you for dear guests thank you for your advice. I think that's a very good wrap for our roundtable. And I hope our audience can get some inspirations from our guests. And again, I want to thank Ms. Wong, Ms. Regina, and Ms. Chen for sharing their time, information, and wisdom. And I hope to see you next time. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for hosting. And please feel free to reach out to me if I can ever be directly helpful for anyone who's listening, watching. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
总有一股力量，跨越星辰大海；总有一种信仰，指引前行航向。当1912年孙中山将大清银行改组为中国银行，那一刻，以中国之银供中国之用的梦想便陡然而生，为社会谋福利，为国家求富强，成为振兴民族金融业的使命担当。那一刻，中国银行不畏强欲，坚守信诺，以宁可行路极深，不肯苟且从命的勇气，只愿为国家维持一分元气，为人民留一线生机。那一刻，中国银行跨越山海，上下求索，只为探寻一条建设近代化、国际化大银行之路。在世界金融业的舞台上，从此有了中国人挺立的脊梁。那一刻，中国银行以人人当具为国牺牲之精神，以先国后行、勤勉努力的信念，穿越纷飞的战火，迎接胜利的曙光。
人民共和国今天胜利了！
当五星红旗飘扬神州大地，打破条框，迎难而上，积极投身社会主义建设的伟大事业。筹集外汇，支持中国远洋运输和外贸经济全面发展。在动荡中前行，在迷茫中寻找方向，冲破封锁和孤立，搭建起新中国与世界互联互通的桥梁。
解放思想，实事求是，团结一致，向前进。
当改革开放和现代化建设的号角吹响，敢想敢为，善作善成，让金融活水浸润民生的每一个角落。从第一张银行卡到第一台 ATM 机，从首家入选世界500强的中国企业，到发行港币和澳门币，为港澳金融稳定贡献新的力量。从国内首家 A+H 上市银行，到中国唯一的双澳银行， 从成为首家入选全球系统重要性银行的新兴经济体金融机构，到成为中国唯一持续经营超过100年的银行，在民族金融史上书写下诸多第一与唯一，在前行的道路上不断续写新的华章。新的时代，新的征程，秉承融通世界、造福社会的使命，赓续奋斗，勇毅前行。以国内商业银行为主体，全球化、综合化为两翼，奋力建设全球一流现代银行集团，在民族复兴的道路上描绘着新的壮美画卷。今天的中国银行全球化版图不断扩展，境外机构遍布全球60多个国家和地区，形成了覆盖40多个国家的一带一路金融大动脉。今天的中国银行综合化平台日臻完善，投资银行直接投资、证券、保险、基金、飞机租赁、资产管理、金融科技、金融租赁，为客户提供更加多元完善的金融服务，发挥国内国际两个市场优势，支持国内大循环建设，畅通国内国际双循环，服务高水平对外开放，是中国银行辉煌历程奏响的时代乐章。支持实体经济发展，满足人民对美好生活的向往，为推动构建人类命运共同体贡献金融力量，是中国银行筑梦征途上镌刻的铮铮誓言。浩渺行无极，扬帆看信风。110年，中国银行恰是风华正茂。110年，中国银行依旧激情飞扬。110年，征途漫漫，心怀理想。110年，尽管向前，一路阳光。
我在中国银行工作了整整36年。
我在中国银行工作了35年。我的行龄已经53年了。
1940年到今年是71年。
1963年，那时候的中国银行啊，在东郊民巷34号。
1953年，
那个时候大概24岁吧。
我这大半辈子都是跟中国银行有缘。
我78年进行以后呢，前7、8年只是在柜台工作的，我是非常喜欢这个业务。我印象当中有一个财务官，学了几句中文吧，什么哥们儿你好，就每个柜台他都要打招呼。
中国银行把我们培养以行为家，我父亲是民国3年进中国银行当练习生。
你爷1958年从上海中行过来，参加了咱们这个银川分行的筹建。爷爷我你咱们中行3代人。
改革开放以后，好多生意人用大麻袋装着人民币做生意，所以说信用卡是各个行业，尤其是生意人员，甚至是说这个青年都非常期待的。
我们是一个大国，千万不要自卑，千万不要自卑。
香港是我们祖国的土地，要让英国来管制，这样的处境什么时候能完呢？
那个时候香港也不是香港现在金融黄山，1分钱都还是有用。
回顾我这一生啊，最重要一个经历就是能够参加到香港的回归工作的全过程。我从20多岁参加工作，也是苦苦等了几十年了，难以形容的心情很美丽。
10年之前，中国银行已经进入到全球10大顶级的这个银行之列，对此呢，我感到非常骄傲。
我作为一名小语种的毕业生，能够用自己的专业架起中行连接世界的桥梁。
我骄傲，我骄傲，我骄傲，
我骄傲，我是中行人。
祝中国银行的事业蒸蒸日上，
银行这边旗帜越来越显亮，
能够实现全球服务的梦想。
祝贺，祝贺，再祝贺！
我感谢中国银行，
祝中国银行110周年生日快乐！